the next guest, let me take my notes because I was totally indulged in the conversation with Dory. Right, there we go. The next guest, her first memory of service design was at a hospital where she, as a teenager, came in with a broken leg. And then her father, who was an architect, explained why it's really important to not just care about the aesthetics of the hospital, but also about understanding people. Louise Vittrup is the guest in the upcoming talk. She grew up in Colombia and Costa Rica, now resides in Denmark as a senior UX designer at 1508, which is the agency in Copenhagen. She works as a designer with a focus on trust, persuasion, design, technology, and data ethics. Wow. And the effects that has on humans. And the talk is going to be about something that I really like. It's going to be about design materials, and a specific one. I often refer to the organization as a design material for service designers, but Louisa is going to talk about trust as a design material, because trust is part of every interaction that we have and we design. So in this talk, you're going to learn how you can work with trust and ethics in order to create a more trustworthy future, more engaging experiences, and deepen our relationship with our customers. Sounds awesome. So again, if you have questions for Louisa, save them for the Q&A. We'll do that after the next two talks. Give a big round of virtual applause. Use that hand clap emoji symbol in the chat, and let's listen to the talk of Louise Vittrup.
Hi, here, Louise again. Are you seeing my screen or me? And
yes, I am, and I think the rest is as well.
Cool. So before I jump into what trust is, I want to start with a little thought experiment. It's an experiment that I often do with my clients and people that I work with. So just rattle your thoughts. So would you trust your partner or boss to look through your unlocked phone? Or would you, if you were to find your boss's phone or your partner's phone or your friend's phone unlocked and unsupervised, what would you do with that power? What would you do with that phone in your hand? Now, I want you to sit with this for just 1 minute. You have access to a lot of information. You have access to a lot of privacy, a lot of data, pictures, text messages. There's a lot of power in your hands. Now, as service designers, I want you to actually think about it. This is the power that we have in our hands when we design services for our users and our consumers. Trust is a word that often gets thrown around and mindlessly, not just in everyday situations, but especially within services and products. It's often said, oh, we need to trust this, or is this creating trust? But it's often just this assumed word rather than a consciously designed for material. And this is something that has basically taken my interest for a very long time. So a little bit about me. My name is Louise. I'm a designer. I'm a UX designer at an agency, 1508. As a designer, I've always been keen on understanding, as many of us have, the nuts and bolts of experiences, specifically how we as humans establish relationships with digital products and how this knowledge can do good. A little bit of background as to why trust has become a sort of central aspect of my toolbox as a material. I started out about 12 years ago, where I specifically work quite a bit with persuasion, emotions, and trust. I was hired often to basically create products that were nudging the user to use them. And I think I naively went into creating products that could be detrimental or that have had negative consequences for society. I'm sure a lot of us have experienced this. Trust, I found, was at the core of this, and was being used to sort of persuade our users to maybe do things that they didn't want to do. So designing trust was more of a persuasion tool rather than something that was inherently a part of the product. I want you to think about this, or what do you think about when you hear the word trust? And feel free to add it into the comments. I'd really like to hear your thoughts on what you sort of define trust to being. Now, I often ask this question at dinner parties or to colleagues or clients, or as an icebreaker, because I think the answers are really revealing and fascinating. Trust, like I said before, is an elusive concept. It's more so than a word. People know what trust is, but have a difficult time defining it. Trust is, in essence, a part of all relationships, and it's a thing that moves us throughout our day. In a way, trust can be a bit like breathing. Like if you imagine breathing throughout your day, you don't really think about it. You don't think about what breathing is or what it means to you, but we do it. And all of a sudden, if we have a coughing fit, we're really keenly aware of what it is when it goes wrong. It's sort of the same thing with trust. Before we go any further, I think we should have a working definition of what trust is. And a definition that I find really appropriate is one by a thought leader on trust. She's an author and a trust expert called Rachel Botsman. She says that for you to leap from a place of certainty or to take a chance on that someone or something unknown, you need a force to pull you over that gap. That force is trust. This force, or trust, is what we as designers must be mindful of. We're the designers of this relationship by making the uncertain certain or confident for our customer. This same Rachel Botsman, she urges us to look sort of at trust and change and waves of disruption through a lens of trust. So she proposes that there's been an evolution of trust. Trust has been through 3 different phases: local, institutional, and what we're entering now, distributed trust. So what's local trust? For a long time, until the mid-1800s, trust was built around tight-knit relationships. So let's say we all here listening in on this speak, normally this would be in a physical room, but let's say all here in this speak, we lived in a tight-knit relationship, in a village, and we all knew each other. And say I wanted to borrow money. You, Mark, you might lend it to me. And if I didn't pay you back, you would all know that I was pretty dodgy. I would probably get a bad reputation, and you would refuse to do business with me in the future. So trust was mostly local and accountability based. Now, institutional trust. In the mid-19th century, society went through this tremendous amount of change, kind of like what we're seeing now, but in a different way. So people were moving to fast-growing cities such as Paris or London, New York, and Copenhagen. We like to think we're a big, fast-moving city. We're not. And a local banker here was probably replaced by a large corporation that didn't know us as individuals. We started to place our trust in these black box systems of authority, things like legal contracts, regulation, insurance, and less trust directly in other people. Trust become institutional and commission-based. Now, it's widely talked about, and I think we've all heard this. It sort of also gets thrown around, just like the word trust, that trust is reaching a low point, or that we're losing trust in a lot of elements in society. And it's definitely talked about that our trust in institutions and many corporate brands has steadily declined and continues to do so. So examples with breaches of trust are ample, and we hear them every single day. It's a focus in the news. I mean, not to speak of, the cliche in the room when we're talking about trust, but, our politicians, or Trump, that by his 1,000th day in office had already racked up about 13,000 lies and counting, and not to speak of his detrimental and dishonest handling of the pandemic. We've trusted that Facebook and the likes have used our data in the way that was articulated to us, and if it was used by a third party, that we could opt out. Or, an old story, but we're hearing stories like this every single day, the Panama Papers that reveal how the rich can exploit offshore tax regimes. Or not to speak of our constant uncertainty about news and whether or not we're being told objective truths. The thing is that because it is our means, trust is our means of being in the world, we're constantly instilling our trust onto politicians, systems of convenience, financial institutions, devices, and services that are rendered. Now, distributed trust is what we're entering now. Now, Botsman, she says that it would be easy to conclude that our trust in large-scale institutions isn't working because we're fed up with abuse of power and lies. But what's really interesting is that although there is some decline in trust in certain kinds of institutions, there's not really any evidence that goes to show that trust as a whole at a large scale is declining. What's happening now is deeper. Sorry, somebody's ringing on the doorbell. What's happening now is deeper than our questioning of size and structure of these institutions. We're starting to realize that institutional trust wasn't designed for the digital age. Our understanding of how trust is built, managed, lost, and repaired in brands and leaders and entire systems is being shaken up right now. Although everything we know and have always understood as set in stone is being flipped. I find this notion just to be incredibly exciting, and I see it as an opportunity for us as service designers to really step up. It forces us to rethink how we build and rebuild and hold trust with our customers, and how customers and users and people across the world maintain the relationships digitally. And I think now, after this whole lockdown, we're really seeing what digital and digital services can do to instill trust or to really remove trust from people and systems. Now, I don't believe that we no longer need any or traditional forms of authority. I believe that we need to embrace that trust is no longer top down. Trust is being deconstructed and served anew. There's a new recipe for trust, and it's again distributed amongst people, and it's accountability based. A distributed trust rewards the trustworthy and discards the untrustworthy. So this gap between what we know and the uncertainty of the unknown is easier to cross through the trustworthy. Now, like Mark said, what I find really interesting is this notion of trust as a design material rather than this evasive concept or an elusive word that we throw around mindlessly. It is a design material. So just like an artist understands the materials with which she works, we as designers need to understand the grain of trust in order to best design for it and with it. I believe that it is our job as designers to design trust consciously and intentionally. I'm not going to propose answers because I don't believe in delivering answers, but I will propose a series of questions that you and your team should be asking yourselves when designing your services. First question, which values do you wish to uphold in your product? There's this saying, and I mean, you've all heard it, and I think we're moving away from this, hopefully, as ethics and design are starting to sort of merge and become more apparent and becoming a more conscious way of designing. But there's a saying that says that data is the new oil in the digital economy. Regardless of whether this is true, consider the implications. When are you drilling on someone else's land? And should you perhaps be asking permission first? Companies have assumed a lot of power over your data. Now, are we willing to give this away just for, say, a light bulb that we can turn on with our voice? As individuals on your team, consider which values, and here's a facet list of values that each have their own definition, and each we could spend days talking about. But consider which values that you strive to uphold in your product. Do this as an individual, and then do this as a team and prioritize. Even if everything in your product, all the features, everything works, it's still important to ask what it is that you're working towards. What are the ethical values that you hold dear, that ground your product? Our consumers and users are so mindful and so keen on seeing products that are showing a clear set of values that this is an important part of your design process. Put it another way, if any of these values that you prioritize, if they were compromised, any of these values, would you quit your job, or would you feel that you failed your mission? Now, the second question that I think your team should be asking And I think this is an implicit part of every service designer, but it needs to be done as a conscious sort of, again, a grounder of your product or service that you're designing. It's what is your intention? Is your intention to, I don't know, say track potential infection chains by warning people if they've been in contact with infected persons? Or is it collecting people's whereabouts to gain insights into areas in times of heightened infectability? We have a case here in Denmark where there was an app that was sent out, and it was very unclear what sort of the purpose of it was, whether it was collecting our location data or if it was actually just helping me as a potential spreader know that I was being a potential spreader. Is your intention to help the user or the consumers to lead a healthier lifestyle, or is it to aggregate data of all your trusters, as I call them also as well, in order to further research within the field of diabetes? Or, I mean, an intention, we might say that it's a negative intention. I don't think an intention is neither good nor bad. Is your intention to harvest data in order to sell targeted ads to third parties? I think the intention, if you're clear about it as a team and you're not trying to sort of skate around what the intention is, you can also be honest about it to your users. We're entirely dependent on the goodwill and trustworthiness of companies that are incentivized to profit from our behavior. So when we start creating, for example, let's just say voice agents that seem human and sound trustworthy, how do you protect your users from being manipulated? Would your customers be maybe willing to pay for, would they be willing to pay for an agent where they can control its goals and limitations? So rather than an assistant that's just listening in on you, could they actually help you? Now, there's a blogger that I follow that proposed this idea that why not get an assistant that would tell me if the terms that I'm signing up for are really invasive and that they want a lot of information you don't normally share. Don't sign up for that. I'd pay for that. Now, the third question, what are the potential impacts of your product? Again, trust and impact go hand in hand. So you all know, impact can be negative. Can the impacts maybe manipulate society and affect democracy? Does your product or service have an implicit racial bias that could lead to the marginalization of certain people? Is it addictive in its nature? I mean, using addiction science, which is a lot of persuasive methodologies have been, and dark patterns have aided in addictive products that we are serving our masses today. And using addiction science to hook people into your product. So they look at more ads as objectively sociopathic. It's not the fault of the technology, and we need to stop blaming technology. It's the people who designed it, for example, the people at Facebook, and optimized its engagement model that made those decisions. I mean, we're all designers, we're making decisions constantly. And I'm sorry, but you can't employ techniques that are known to cause mental health issues and then ask, how did we get here? Or shrug and blame users for their lack of self-control when you intentionally design the system to work that way. Now, all impacts obviously aren't negative. A lot of products that are positive, that have positive impacts also have negative impacts. And I think we need to be keenly aware of sort of the wide holistic spectrum of impacts that a product could have. So some of the positive impacts, I mean, can your service and collection of data, for example, in an energy application that helps your users sort of understand their electricity bill, could it in essence help and the data that we show them make energy or consumption decisions that will help reduce carbon dioxide? Or could it assist patients with mobility challenges receive a thorough and trustworthy medical examination virtually? Or could it help a diabetic manage their blood sugar? Again, all these three examples could have both this as a positive impact, but could also have a negative impact. And we need to outweigh these two to see where we're going. Now, fourth and final, and not the last, and not least, it's how are you being transparent? So transparent, I mean, Transparent, there's a lot of things that you design into your product that assume transparency. I have to speak about this elsewhere. But it's also about how we're communicating what the product and the service actually does. So transparency is not hiding behind a checkbox at checkout or at terms and conditions. It's understanding how you're communicating the consequences of your product. So what are the negative and positive consequences for your customer? Are you being honest about what your service provides and how? Are you keeping yourselves accountable for failures and mistakes? So if you fail because your technology is failing or because the communication was failing, how are you staying accountable to your users? Again, this is maintaining a level of trust and always being honest about your role and responsibility and the availability of your service. A lot of you may know about this story. I choose it because I think it's very extreme when it comes to privacy and private breach of data. Now, some companies are very open about their data collection practices, but most of them prefer to keep their customers in the dark. And they choose control above sharing and would rather seek forgiveness than permission. Now, I think this is what we need to be moving completely away from. There's no reason for this. This story is about the smart vibrator, which tracked owners' use of the vibrator without their knowledge. I think that's incredibly invasive. The app that controls the device was barely secured, allowing anyone within Bluetooth range to seize control of the device. In addition to this, the data that was collected was sent back to Standard Innovation, letting the company know about the temperature of the device and the vibration intensity. I mean, these things combined reveal intimate information about the user's sexual habits that, again, nobody needs to know. This is having access to your partner or your boss's phone again. This is what we need to be keenly aware of. Now, I have a million more examples. Obviously, we don't have the time to share them. So the last litmus test that you should be asking yourselves when releasing a service or a product, and this is very, very important because I think this is the one that we can relate to the most as designers and as a team. Would you trust this with your own data, with your own life and privacy? And if your answer is no, then definitely don't do it. Thank you. I look forward to hearing your questions and looking forward to answering your questions as well.
Thank you, Louise. I'm looking forward to the questions as well.